Today, we're going to try and solve one of history's most fascinating prophetic puzzles. It's all about a future, 7-year period of intense global turmoil, something many people call the tribulation. You've probably heard the term thrown around, but what you might not know is that, according to the source material, it's all based on a very specific, almost mathematical blueprint. So let's just get right to it. Where in the world does this very specific time frame, exactly 7 years, actually come from? It's not just some random number pulled out of thin air. To really get it, you have to follow a trail of prophetic clues all the way back to a single ancient text. Okay, first things first, let's nail down the core concept here. When we talk about the tribulation, at least according to this theological framework, we're not just talking about some vague, bad time in the future. No, it's seen as a very distinct period, with a very specific, two-part purpose. And here is that core definition. The tribulation is described as a future 7-year period where two major things are meant to happen. 1, to complete God's discipline for the nation of Israel, and 2, to bring a final judgment on the unbelieving world. This is also why you'll sometimes hear it called the time of Jacob's trouble. And just to be clear, this is not described as some minor bump in the road. I mean, this quote really paints a picture of distress that is completely off the charts. The language is absolute. Nothing like it has ever happened before, and nothing like it will ever happen again. That really emphasizes just how unique and severe this period is believed to be. All right, now we get to the real heart of the puzzle, the timing. The entire basis for this specific 7-year period comes from a prophecy in the book of Daniel. And this interpretation we're looking at sees it as a kind of prophetic clock, one that's been ticking down for centuries toward a final conclusion. The key passage is right there in Daniel, chapter 9. It talks about a decreed timeline of 77s, which is sometimes translated as 70 weeks, that have been specifically set apart for Daniel's people, the Jews, to accomplish a whole set of redemptive goals. So what on earth does 77s actually mean? Well, the interpretation laid out in our source is that it's talking about 70 groups of 7 years. And, do the math. 70 times 7 gives you a total prophetic timeline of 490 years. Now, here's where that prophetic clock starts ticking. The prophecy says that from the moment a decree was given to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah is cut off, which is interpreted to mean his death, 69 of those 7s would pass. Okay, so 69 times 7, that equals 483 years. And the source material argues that this lines up historically with the time between that ancient decree and the crucifixion. And this simple math reveals the central mystery. If the total prophecy is for 490 years, and we can account for 483 of those years, well, that leaves one final 7 completely unaccounted for. This is the missing piece of the puzzle. A final 7-year period, with the prophetic clock seemingly paused just before the very end. So the big question is, what's supposed to happen during this final, unpaused 7-year period? Well, the text of Daniel actually gives us some pretty specific clues about what kicks that clock back into motion. According to Daniel 9:27, this final 7-year period kicks off when a future ruler, a figure often identified as the Antichrist, confirms a covenant or a treaty with Israel for that exact length of time, 1, 7, or 7 years. It's this political agreement that is said to start the clock ticking again. But here's a really crucial detail. This 7-year period isn't supposed to be uniform. The prophecy describes a huge, dramatic turning point that happens exactly halfway through. See, the period gets split into 2 equal halves of 3.5 years each. The first half is supposedly marked by a kind of relative peace under this new covenant. But Daniel's prophecy says that in the middle of the 7, that very same ruler will break the treaty and force an end to the Jewish temple sacrifices. And this second half is what's often called the Great Tribulation. According to the source, this is when that unparalleled distress we talked about earlier really kicks into high gear. All because the ruler who made the covenant suddenly breaks it and sets himself up to be worshipped. Now, what's really fascinating is how the source connects different prophecies to back all of this up. The argument is that you can find passages in both Daniel and the book of Revelation that use totally different units of time, but they're all pointing to the exact same 3.5-year period. It's like we're connecting the dots. So let's just look at the evidence presented here. In the book of Revelation, one passage mentions a period of 42 months. Another one talks about 1,260 days. Now, if you use a 30-day prophetic month, both of those equal exactly 3.5 years. Then you go back to Daniel, and this same period is called a time, times, and half a time. So that's 1 year plus 2 years plus half a year. Again,
3.5 years. The argument is that these aren't just coincidences, they are corroborating clues all describing the very same time frame. Okay, so let's just quickly recap the logic of how this puzzle is solved. Step 1, a 490-year prophecy is given for Israel. Step 2, a 483-year chunk of it is fulfilled, stopping right at the death of the Messiah. And this creates a gap, a pause in the prophetic timeline, leaving one final 7-year period, the tribulation, to fulfill the whole thing at some point in the future. And it's so important to remember that this all has a stated purpose. The original prophecy way back in Daniel laid out these 6 very specific goals for the 490-year timeline. So the really crucial takeaway is that this final 7-year tribulation isn't just about chaos. According to this view, it's the specific required period to finally bring all of these ultimate redemptive goals to completion. When you boil it all down, the entire framework for a 7-year tribulation rests on this one very specific, very mathematical reading of prophecy. It treats these ancient scriptures like a detailed timeline just waiting to be fulfilled. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. What does it mean to see prophecy not just as metaphor, but as math?